James, The Settlers.
The Settlers, a film I saw this week. I actually saw a trailer for it when I went to go see Poor Things, and I thought that looks really good, looks really beautiful. I fancy it. I thought it had some very promising reviews from debut film director Felipe Galvez Habel. Sorry if I butchered the pronunciation of that. It's set in 1901 in a region of Chile called the Tierra del Fuego. Basically, what this film is sort of has the setting of an American Western, but obviously set in a completely different part. A man called Menendez owns a vast part of this land, this huge archipelago. And we see the opening of this film as he is constructing, or him and his team are constructing this fence that stretches across the landscape. They're essentially settling into completely uncharted land, trying to build an economy, trying to essentially develop the country as we understand it. What essentially happens is this administrative expedition turns into a violent hunt for the Onas and the Selk'nam people, which are one of the indigenous peoples of the Tierra del Fuego. And he says, there are savages on these lands, refers to them as Indians. I want you to go and take care of them for me. And he tasks this job to a British soldier called Alexander McLennan, who's Scottish. And he basically is with this ragtag group of people who are just basically building this fence. And he needs to find someone who's good at shooting. He needs to find someone else who knows the land and knows the people. And he ends up being this man who's half native, half white, called Segundo, turns out to be a very good shot with a rifle. And he doesn't really have a choice in the matter, but he ends up having to go with Alexander McLennan across the land. You've also got this definitely racist American called Bill, who also accompanies them, and they're sort of this unlikely group of three who are tasked with going across this land. And the story goes on from there and tells a story kind of about the origins of how Chile became, or this region of Chile developed and became what it is today. There are a lot of scenes which are very difficult to watch, and it's definitely violent. You've got this very classic thing in cinema where you have an absolutely beautiful landscape contrast with very horrible scenes of violence. The design and the cinematography of this film, George, was just absolutely breathtaking.
Wow.
Just stunning. So if you've ever studied rules of composition, especially in landscape photography, I cannot praise it enough for having immaculate blocking, rule of thirds, leading lines, S's and twos that carry the eye down. Many of the scenes are intercut with shots of this gorgeous, vast, uncharted, untamed land. And I looked at so many of the scenes, and what I really, really praised for it is that the blocking and the balance of every single frame was so well done that I felt like if you removed the dialogue entirely, I'd understand the drama in every scene, even if no one spoke. Wow. And I think it's a real praise to it as a storyboarded. And we sort of it's 95 minutes long, this film, and the first 2/3 of it, the dialogue is very minimal. It's very selective with what it chooses to say, and you almost go, I understand completely the dynamic from just looking at this scene, and the color is phenomenal. It's in 4:3 aspect ratio, and just every single time that camera was put in a new location, I just thought, wow. Was it a little bit too perfect? Maybe. Sometimes people criticize the films of Tom Ford. I love them, but for being almost a little bit too perfectly manicured and fashion editorialized. And I think Tom Ford's films sort of have a nice quality to them, but I sort of almost understand that criticism. Sometimes I was looking at this film, and it looks like a gorgeous Ralph Lauren high-concept magazine editorial outfit. I mean, they were just beautiful. Leather satchels, fur wool. Stunning.
Is that ever problematic? Does it ever glamorize?
It's not glamorized. It's just really intentionally blocked and placed. So everyone is so... you could just cut to a wide of people traveling in a campsite, and the way in which people are leant up against a tree, sat by the fire, stood smoking a pipe. It feels like a painting. And I actually, considering what it's trying to do, admired its clarity and its precision in that. And I just thought, beautiful. I think you've got some really great performances. You've got Mark Stanley, who plays Alexander McLennan, Camilo Aranciba, Benjamin Westphal, and Sam Spruill's in there as well. The film does this really interesting thing where sort of about 2/3 of the way through, we cut forward 7 years in the future. And I had that classic thing where I'm in the cinema. Two people go to the toilet right before that 7 years later moment happens, and they come back and the film really shifts gear. And they came back in. I'm like, none of the rest of the film is going to make sense to you because you don't understand it. Anyway, the film really changes in the last sort of 20, 30 minutes, and we get dialogue becomes way more important. And it leads to an ending, which I found really sort of quite powerful. It's 95 minutes long, which is short, but it feels much longer than that. Not because it's bad, but more so its pacing, especially in the first 2 minutes, is very decisive and very slow and very precise. But if you'd put me into that film blind and told me it was 2.5 hours, I might have believed you, just because it was very slow and decisive. But what I will say, it's very powerful. It's gorgeous to look at. Like thematically, a lot of what's important happens outside of the frame, but you're left with this very strong feeling when you leave the cinema. And there's a really fantastic quote around the middle where this guy says, the wool you carry has no value because it's stained with blood. And there's this really great idea that, like, no matter what advancement and economy and productivity you bring to this nation, it's always been tainted because of the way in which you systematically carried out a genocide for indigenous people. And it's really thought-provoking without shoving it in your face. I think if you are someone, we get emails sometimes about people wanting to find something that challenges the way in which they watch films and the way in which they're confronted with imagery, and you're looking to palate cleanse yourself from studio-sanctioned films, I would really recommend The Settlers to go and watch it. It's not an easy watch, but I think it does what a lot of really great historical films do, which is that it puts you in a time and place and makes you feel like you're there. You learn something about a period of history that you didn't know before, and when the film ends, you actually want to go and seek out a little bit more about that subject a bit more, and I think it really succeeds in that sense. It's very, very good.
So where can people see that? At cinema?
Yeah, it's showing in cinema.
Great.
It's not got the biggest release because it's not the biggest film, but I saw it at a cousin, and yeah, it's still got screenings. So this is recorded on the day before this comes out, so you can definitely go and see it this week. Strong recommend.
So if you guys have seen, is it Settlers or
The Settlers?
The Settlers. If you guys have seen The Settlers, let us know at hello@pulpkitchenpodcast.com. Sounds like a very visually striking film.
Yeah.
I'm actually quite keen to check that out. 95 minutes as well. Always a selling
95
point.
minutes, yeah.
Let us know.
I like what it did with sort of its dialogue flip. Dialogue not so important, visuals are much more important, and it's really great dialogue that sort of, it really leans into it and it really goes for it, and it ends. You know that nice little adjustment when film's doing it switches you up. I enjoyed that, and I thought it was very very disciplined, tells the story with a very steady hand.
The Settlers.
The number of times I wanted to pause it and just admire the frame, and I want that as my desktop wallpaper. I want that as my desktop wallpaper.